On the morning a city turned silent, a paperboy, finding no one to buy a paper, knew, without understanding the math or the men behind the trading floor, that something had come loose in New York that would pull the rest of America into a long, cold tumble. They called him Thomas, Tommy Hale, though as the 1920s wound toward their last frantic months, you could have called him 100 things: clerk, dreamer, survivor. He was 26, lean from long hours and cheap meals, and he lived in a narrow walk-up behind a tailor shop on East 12th Street. Tommy kept a ledger in his pocket that he treated like a Bible, not because it contained scripture, but because it contained promise. A line for this week's rent, a line for what he hoped to put away, a line for the day he would trade his apron for a suit and speak with a bank account that didn't rattle when coins fell into it. He was a broker's assistant at a downtown firm that sold securities to neighborhood men and women who had caught the fever of easy profit, and he believed, as a great many did, that America's ascent was a straight arrow pointing up. The market had for a decade seemed to confirm them. The roaring 20s pulsed with electric lights, automobiles on every corner, radios singing into parlors. Factories hummed and wealth glittered at parties that lasted until dawn. Stocks ticked higher and higher, but behind the ticker tape's incessant chatter were habits that would prove poisonous. Buying on margin, speculative syndicates that moved prices with whispered rumors, and the casual assumption that paper wealth was no different from gold. Tommy's day began as it always did, a quick shave with a cracked mirror, a coffee that tasted faintly of soap, and his run down to the office to copy prices into the ledger. He wore his optimism like a coat, a little worn at the seams, but warm enough. His boss, Mr. Adler, was the sort of man who spoke in bangs and baritone and believed firmly that good posture reflected a good portfolio. Adler had started as a messenger boy himself and liked to tell Tommy how he once rode a freight train to Chicago and came back with the savings that would buy his first desk. "The market is America's ladder," Adler liked to say. "You climb, you don't complain." On Thursday, October 24th, 1929, that ladder began to sway. It started, as most crises do, as a series of small, sane acts blown into panic by rumor. A few heavy sellers pushed shares down. The ticker tape, normally a reassurance, became an alarm, labored and late. Tommy watched the tape wind like a wounded creature and read figures that made his stomach hollow. Prices slipping, then dropping, then collapsing. New investors had always believed there would be a backstop, someone to buy when they wished to sell. The banks had been chummy with the brokers, and margin loans, a buyer paying perhaps 10% of the purchase and borrowing the rest, had become a social norm. When stocks dipped, brokers called customers to put up more cash. Many could not. Phones lit up with pleading, threats, and quiet admissions that there was no more money to be poured in. Tommy began to see men in the office he had known as steady, their trousers dusted with the factory floor, who had become suddenly silent, staring at their hands as if the numbers on the tape were a new language. At noon, Mr. Adler told Tommy to fetch coffee and a fresh roll of ticker tape. When the elevator doors opened to the trading floor, the sound hit him like a wave. Shouting, the rubbery slap of shoes on polished wood, men craning to see numbers that seemed to slip from their hands. On the balcony, the crowd was thicker than at any opening night in the theater district. A man began to cry. A woman made a noise that sounds something like a sob, but was not. Tommy clutched his ledger, palms damp, and for the first time in his life, the idea of losing everything stopped being abstract. The first day was later dubbed Black Thursday, frantic, fear-stricken, but not yet final. When bankers and financiers stepped in, propping prices with large purchases late in the day, newspapers called it a rescue. People breathed. Tommy went home that evening with hands that trembled not from cold, but from shock. He told himself the world would be the same come morning. He lied to himself and slept. But markets do not obey wishes. Black Friday passed. Saturday's hours held a semblance of hope. On Monday, things calmed only to a deceptive degree. Then came Tuesday, October 29th, Black Tuesday. The floor at the New York Stock Exchange dissolved into a frenzy. Orders came in like a tide driven by wind and panic. Prices sank with the speed of icy water down a chute. Brokers who had promised to hold positions to the end found they could not. Margin demands became impossible mountains. Men who had just the day before believed complacently in tomorrow found at the end of Tuesday that they had no tomorrow at all. Tommy watched the faces of older brokers, the men who had once handled nation's paper, stiffen and fold like paper cups.
Outside, New York was a city slouched with disbelief. Shops still opened, bells still rang, but the undertow was palpable. The newspapers printed bold headlines with teeth. People told one another stories, at first of friends who lost a little, then of families who had lost every cent. Tommy walked home that night through streets lit by gas lamps and electric bulbs, and at every doorway, a paper pressed into hands bore the same grim numerals. The crash did not, by itself, create the Great Depression. It was the detonator of a complex fuse. Factories slowed. Banks held loans to companies and farms that could no longer be repaid. Farms, already strained by poor weather and falling prices, began to collapse. International trade constricted as other economies contracted and protectionist policies choked off markets. Money vanished from circulation, or, more precisely, it stayed trapped inside institutions that turned out to be hollowed by bad loans. Between 1929 and 1933, unemployment rose, businesses failed, and the urban landscape that had once hummed with a modern confidence became a place of breadlines and shuttered windows. By 1933, roughly 1/4 of America's labor force was out of work. Tommy's own life shifted in ways that would mark him forever. At first, his pace stuttered, then stopped. Mr. Adler kept him on for a month, fingers white on the desk as he tried to salvage accounts and reassure clients. Then the firm received its margin calls. One by one, clients cut ties, and the ledger in Tommy's breast pocket, once full of hopeful entries, became a list of omissions. The tailor downstairs kept stitching, his hand steady, but he too began bringing home fewer shirts. Tommy ate less to make what was there go further. He sold his watch to a pawnbroker because the ticking metal mocked him with its insistence on time. There were other, quieter losses for which there were no official numbers. Weddings postponed, children's shoes patched until they would not hold together anymore. A neighbor, Mrs. Klein, had once collected coins in a jar to buy stamps for a letter to her son in Philadelphia. When she took it out, all the coins rattled and proved insufficient for the face of the bill. The community, once so noisy with Sunday picnics and organ recitals, found itself gathered at the soup kitchen, where lines formed like ranks of gray ghosts. Tommy began, hesitantly, to understand the violence of systemic failure. In the downtown rooms he had seen, the wealthy closed their shutters and spoke of portfolios and recovery as if it could be purchased like a commodity. But for the millions who walked the streets, the conversation was not statistics, it was hunger and humiliation. Men who had been the pride of their families now passed through breadlines that carried the same quiet shame in every county of the nation. Women who had balanced budgets with a magician's care found themselves unable to stretch pennies as they once did. Children learned to wait for dinner and learned fast that the world could be capricious and enormous. The seeds of blame were sown everywhere. Some said it was speculation, the reckless appetite of investors who treated the market like a game. Others blamed the bankers, charging that their risk-taking and secret deals had left common depositors exposed.
Tariffs and international policy were fingered. So was the Federal Reserve, accused of mismanaging the money supply. A few blamed fate. Most blamed whoever was closest, whoever could be shouted at in the street. Herbert Hoover, president when the crash occurred, tried at first to calm and encourage. He believed in volunteerism, in the idea that business and local organizations would step forward to help. But the scale of the catastrophe outran that model. Local relief efforts sprang up, churches, neighborhood committees, charitable organizations. But government response felt slow and distant to many who stood with hollow bellies and open hands. By 1932, dissatisfaction with the pace and scale of relief had morphed into political demand. Franklin D. Roosevelt's promise of a New Deal in 1932 rode that rising tide. When he took office in 1933, his administration moved quickly to craft programs that put people to work, reformed banks, and attempted to stabilize prices. These programs, like the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps, would change the physical landscape of the country. Roads built where none had been, bridges spanned across rivers, national forests tended. But policies could not repair every broken life or retrieve every lost savings account. Tommy, who had learned to read the whispers between men's lips, eventually found steady work through one of these programs. It was not glamorous work. It was concrete, cold, and honest. He helped pour the foundation of a bridge outside town, his palms raw from handling wooden forms and steel. There, in the dust and the clang, he met men who had been accountants and stagehands, barbers and school teachers, all bound by a common knowledge that the country required hands that could rebuild as much as it required plans that could be signed.
He also learned other lessons: to distrust the glamour of sudden wealth, to recognize that markets are social machinery made of human hands and human failings, and to see how policy, sometimes invisible and abstruse, could become a lifeline or a noose. Many Americans would never regain the accumulations they had lost during the early 1930s, but others discovered new forms of community, mutual aid, and labor organization that would alter the country's social fabric. Unions grew stronger in the years that followed. The public demanded regulations to restrain the finance that had run wild. The Securities Act and the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1934 attempted to put guardrails on the very market that had once seemed immortal. Tommy's personal arc threaded through this larger story. He married a nurse named Eliza in 1935 in a small ceremony that cost little in coin, but much in resolve. Eliza had worked in hospital wards where the stench of disinfectant and sorrow had taught her fortitude. She had seen men lying listless, their pride as threadbare as their socks. With Eliza, Tommy learned to laugh again with a mouth that knew restraint. They set up a modest apartment where the walls, though thin, were theirs. They kept a radio on for company, listening to Roosevelt's fireside chats that sought to humanize policy and speak plainly to citizens. Roosevelt's voice on the air had a quality of neighborliness. People listened as if someone were speaking directly to their kitchen table. Yet there were nights when Tommy woke and felt the phantom weight of lost paper, and old futile accounting of what might have been. He would sit on the edge of the bed and think of Mr. Adler, who had not weathered the storm. Adler had tried to keep the firm afloat, promising clients he would find a buyer, until he grew so tired his eyes filled and he stopped promising. Then one day he simply did not come in. His nephew found the office emptied, ledgers closed, and a lingering scent of tobacco. Adler had been proud and roughened by life. He had believed that individuals prevailed by their wits and work. The crash taught Tommy that private virtue was insufficient when public systems failed. Across the country, stories like Adler's made up a chorus.
Farmers watched their crop prices plunge, while their debts remained ironclad. Tenant farmers were evicted. In Oklahoma and the plains, topsoil came loose from drought and wind, and blew across fields in clouds of despair. The Dust Bowl's black blizzards were another calamity that compounded the economic storm. Cities overflowed with migrants, and families that had believed they were safe inside the American promise found themselves adrift. There were moments of surprising kindness, too. One winter, when the Hale family's heating faltered, the tailor downstairs left a bag of coal at their door. A church in the neighborhood collected clothing and left a box for anyone who needed an extra blanket. Men who had stood apart before now shared what little they had. Out of necessity, the community became a makeshift safety net. Reciprocity replaced market exchange in small but vital ways. By the late 1930s, the shape of America had changed, but was not irreparably broken. The New Deal reshaped the relationship between state and citizen, and World War II, still a few years away from Tommy's perspective, would further transform the economy and society. Many of the institutional reforms enacted after the crash remained: stronger bank oversight, labor protections, new expectations about the social contract. For Tommy, the years that followed brought a more ordinary kind of happiness. He became a foreman on road crews and later supervised smaller construction projects. He and Eliza raised 2 children. They taught them to count carefully, to value thrift not as fear, but as prudence, and to understand that security comes from a mixture of private care and public structure. At the dinner table, the ledger in his breast pocket, long since replaced by a stable paycheck and a savings account that did not rattle, became a story he told in fragments, warning and lesson combined. His children asked for names. "Dad, why did the market crash?" He told them that it was less a single villain than the sum of many acts: grade without prudence, credit without checks, faith in paper without roots. The crash's human cost was a ledger with thousands of pages. Some names were printed in bold headlines. Others were never recorded. Farmers, bankers, clerks, shopkeepers, and factory hands all bore its weight. The nation's psyche had been marked by it, a shudder that made people think differently about risk, about the reach of government, about the responsibilities that accompany modern finance.
In later years, Tommy walked down to the river on calm autumn days and watched the tugboats pull barges as if the country's commerce were steady and sensible. He loved the sight of workers in hard hats and boots, men and women who handled tools with steady hands, because they had the power to fix what had been broken, at least in part. The crash had taught him that economies are made and remade by people, by those who count coins and those who mend roads, by those who draft laws and those who sew shirts. It had taught him to listen for signals beyond the ticker tape, the small kindnesses, the local committees meeting in church basements, the elderly neighbor teaching a child how to darn socks. When he grew old, Tommy sometimes wondered if the fear of repeating those bad days had altered the nation more than the days themselves. Had Americans become too cautious? Or had they simply learned a hard lesson about the balance between freedom and oversight? He did not know. What he did know was simple and concrete: that a sudden collapse of paper promises had smashed open 1,000 private lives, and that it had taken the combined strength of communities, government measures, and patient hands to begin mending them. On the last day of his life, as his children clustered in the small living room around a radio, Tommy's daughter asked whether he regretted the years he had spent on the trading floor. He thought of Mr. Adler and of the ledger in his pocket, and of the smell of wet cement on the bridge he had helped build. "I learned," he said finally, "that when a system fails, it's not enough to blame it. You have to rebuild it." He turned a brittle page of memory and smiled faintly.
Outside the window, a delivery truck rumbled past, and across town, new children rode bikes on clean pavements that their forebears had helped lay. The crash of 1929 remains for historians an epochal moment, a stark demonstration of market vulnerability and human frailty. For Tommy Hale, it was a story of loss and recovery, of hunger and work, of an era that demanded humility and then slowly offered a chance to be whole again. The ledger that once symbolized possibility became, in the end, a map of where he had been, what he had lost, and the road he had built afterward.